It's that time of year again. I'm bored at home during the summer and don't have any college sports to vlog about. So while I really need to, think long and hard about the type of content I want to make for you guys, I think right now I'd much rather just do a full-on retrospective of my new favorite hockey team, the Penn State Nittany Lions. You see, I have a confession to make. I grew up a Michigan Wolverines fan.
Boo, you stink!
Well, hopefully the booing has subsided by now. It is true that when I was younger, I loved Michigan and would follow their football and hockey teams constantly. That would all change in the winter of 2024, when Michigan would reject me with one of the weirdest rejection letters I've ever seen. This turned out to be a blessing, however, as Penn State would accept me into their main campus right away, and it's been amazing ever since. I'm proud to call State College my college town, and I wanted to talk about this for a while. Hockey is my favorite sport, and Penn State hockey history has always fascinated me. With how hockey-centric the Northeast is, the fact that Penn State's varsity hockey program is only 13 years old is insane to me. Also, just for simplicity here, I'm not going to recognize the brief stints of the NCAA in the 1940s as official Penn State hockey. Between 1909 and 1943, they played 26 games. So for all intents and purposes, Penn State D1 hockey begins in 2012. Also, I don't really want to say it, but yeah, due to how niche college hockey was, especially in the Big Ten before COVID, it is very hard to find relevant video clips for most of the games. I'll do my best, but just be ready for that in case it gets confusing. So, while we wait for another amazing season at Pegula Ice Arena, let's look back at the short yet extensive history of the Penn State men's ice hockey team.
Hello, I like money.
What inspired you to build a second Krusty Krab right next door to the original?
Money.
If you're going to talk about Penn State hockey, you need to mention Terry Pegula. The real smarties of you might recognize him as the guy whose name is, on the arena, and that's with good reason. Pegula would get his bachelor's degree in natural gas engineering from Penn State in 1973 and founded the company East Reserves, a drilling company. You may be saying, hey, why have I never heard of this East Reserves company before? Well, it's because after discovering a huge amount of natural gas in the Appalachian Mountains, old Terry Boy would sell his company to Shell for over $4.7 billion. Other ventures of his included, a stranglehold of Buffalo area sports, as he is the current owner of the Buffalo Bills, Buffalo Sabres, Buffalo Bandits, and the Rochester Americans of the AHL. So, what do you get when you mix a major university lacking one of the big four sports and a hockey-obsessed graduate who could only be considered to have fuck you money? That's right, the biggest donation in Penn State's history, which would eventually amount to $108 million for the construction of a brand new, state-of-the-art arena. This was to replace Penn State's old arena, the Ice Pavilion, which only had seating for about 1,350. The new one would sit over 6,500. Now, all they needed was a coach. And who better than the recently hired club coach Guy Gadowski. In his first season with the club team, the Penn State Icers, they would have a record of 29-4-1, and with most of the club team being upgraded to varsity, it only made sense to keep the chemistry they built. Spoiler alert, Gadowski is still the head coach of the Nittany Lions to this day.
Please, Pete, I need this! My
team
is kind of homeless.
And just like that, Penn State hockey was up and running. But remember that $100 million ice arena they're building? Yeah, it turns out it's going to take a little longer than 2 years for it to be ready. So, the first year of varsity ice hockey at Penn State will be played at the Penn State Ice Pavilion. Penn State would open their season against the American International Yellow Jackets, and would split the series, with both games going to overtime. Unfortunately, due to lack of Big Ten teams in college hockey up until Penn State's restart, Penn State would have to pull a Notre Dame and play independent. Even though with this supposed easy schedule, Penn State would struggle in their first year. They'd get some notable wins, including a 5-4 win over Ohio State and a 3-2 win at Michigan State, which would kick off the 7-game winning streak. Penn State would finish the year going 13-14, and would not qualify for any playoffs. Still, for their first year of existence, a .481 win percentage ain't the worst thing in the world.
We stink! We stink! We stink! We stink!
And with that, the move that hockey boomers today still say ruined college hockey. The Big Ten Conference was created, with Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Minnesota all joining Penn State to form a new 6-team conference. The good news for Penn State was that Pegula Ice Arena had finally finished its construction. Its first ever game was a 4-1 sold-out barn burner that showed just how popular hockey would be at Penn State. The bad news was the rest of the season. The Nittany Lions posted an abysmal 8-26-2 record with multiple embarrassing sweeps under their belt, as Penn State would fail to win a game against Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan State in their first year. It seemed like nothing was going Penn State's way until the last game of the season, where they'd squeak out a 4-2 win versus rival Ohio State going into the first ever Big Ten tournament, in which they'd play Michigan. Funnily enough, Michigan was the best opponent the Nittany Lions could face, as they had split the season series. This would culminate in the dogfight of a game at Xcel Energy Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. Then, in double overtime, freshman Zach Saar beat Michigan goaltender Zach Nagelvort 5-hole and sent Penn State to the semifinals, where they were then immediately dispatched by the Wisconsin Badgers. When you look at this season in a bottle, it seems like an utter failure, but the fact that Penn State sold out all but 2 of its home games, Guy Gadowski won Coach of the Year in the Big Ten, and they made the semifinals in the Big Ten tournament in their second ever season, boded well for the future.
Mom, Stewie's dead.
2014 was the year that Penn State really started to ramp up its program expectations. They'd start the season in the out-of-conference games, going 6-2-2, including their first ever trip way up north to Alaska, in which now, seems like a yearly tradition. Penn State would seem to keep up that momentum from the start, when they split a series at Michigan and swept Wisconsin in Wisconsin. They would even split a home series versus Ohio State and take a win and a tie at the home series versus Michigan State. The end of the season was much more polarizing, as another Wisconsin sweep, Michigan sweep, and a split with Minnesota would help bolster their chances at a high seed in the Big Ten tournament. What would ultimately dash their hopes would be getting swept in 3 straight away series to Michigan State, Ohio State, and Minnesota. Penn State would clinch the number 4 seed and play Ohio State. Penn State would clinch the number 4 seed and play Ohio State at Joe Louis Arena, where they would lose 3-1. The regular season was a much better improvement from 2013, and it was their first winning season in program history. This alone would make me believe it was a successful season. However, bowing out early definitely stung, and the late collapses away from home didn't help. Man, I really hope Penn State hockey doesn't make it a tradition to go on these ranting losing spurts. That would really suck.
And here we go. I hope you're hungry for nothing.
Continuing the trend of development, Penn State would take another leap in their 4th season. While the Big Ten Conference record would stay the same, as they went 10-9-1 in back-to-back seasons, their overall record is what really made this season an improvement, as they went 21-13-4. Some of their out-of-conference games included a sweep of American International, the first time they played since 2012, another trip to Alaska, which resulted in a win and a tie, and a home series with then Hockey East resident Notre Dame, which saw a series split. Penn State would then open their Big Ten schedule strong, going 6-1 over the Spartans, Badgers, Golden Gophers, and Buckeyes. However, things would start going downhill from here, as Penn State would lose 8 of their last 12 and fall from 1st to 3rd in the standings. This would see the Lions open their 2016 Big Ten tournament against Wisconsin, and they would beat them 5-2. Penn State had momentum on their side, but ran into a brick wall, known as the Michigan Wolverines, who had swept Penn State in all 4 games before. And that night was more of the same, as Michigan would kick Penn State's ass, winning 6-2, and would go on to win the Big Ten. I mean, the fact that Michigan had 3 of the top 4 points leaders in the NCAA, Kyle Connor, JT Compher, and Tyler Mott, all of whom are still in the NHL today, this is probably expected. Penn State is now at a crossroads, though. Just 4 years into their existence, the freshmen who built the program will now be gone. Can Penn State recover from this adversity? Yeah, I'd say so. The 2016-17 season was filled with a lot of firsts, the main one being that now, there's a lot of accurate record on stats, so I can go a lot more in depth. It also showed the largest departure of players in Penn State's existence so far, as key pieces such as Kenny Brooks, Tommy Olszczak, and Matt Scoff, among others, would graduate. However, recruiting would more than make up for the loss of talent, as 2 recruits, Brett Murray and Nikita Pavlicek, would both be selected in the NHL draft prior to joining Penn State, at 99th and 197th overall respectively. The story of the regular season was, well, the same shit as the last 2 seasons, as Penn State would once again have the same conference record, going 10-9-1, with another late season collapse being the main culprit. The Nittany Lions would lose 9 of their last 15 games before the Big Ten tournament. Back in Detroit, Penn State would once again be facing Michigan. And in a nice turn of fate from last year's Big Ten quarterfinal game, freshman goaltender Peyton Jones would stand on his head, allowing only 1 goal on 30 shots, as the Nittany Lions would crush the Wolverines 4-1. They'd move on to the number 5 team in the country, Minnesota. The semifinal would be a dogfight, as Penn State would go up 1-0 early, but Minnesota would take 2 right before the first period ended. Penn State would get a lone goal in the second, and take a lead on a power play just 1 minute in the third. Minnesota would respond 2.5 minutes later, and we'd remain deadlocked for not 1, but 2 overtimes, until...
Come back defensively, but it's Smirnoff right in front! Penn State wins it in overtime! Eric Audio, the game-winning goal!
Penn State would get the break they needed, and off of Andrew Sturt's 3rd assist of the game, Eric Audio would send Penn State to a meeting with Wisconsin in the championship. This game was all about chances. Penn State would capitalize with 4.5 minutes left of the first period, with Liam Folks sending one home. It would take almost 25 minutes, but Wisconsin would respond, tying the game on a power play goal. For the second time in 2 days, Penn State was going to overtime. Then they're going to double overtime. Wisconsin would put the pressure to the max, barraging Peyton Jones with just over 50 shots on goal. But it wouldn't matter, as once again, Liam Folk would break loose.
Watch out, breakaway to win the tournament. They do. Liam Folks, the freshman.
In just their 5th year of existence, Penn State would get their first conference title. And that would come with an automatic bid to the NCAA tournament. Penn State would be placed in the Midwest region, which this year was in Cincinnati and had powerhouses Denver, Union, and Michigan Tech, with the Nittany Lions grabbing the number 3 seed and playing number 2 Union. And for the first ever NCAA tournament game, it was a bloodbath. Almost everyone on the team was getting on the score sheet. From Dillard Richards to Brendan Bureau, Chase Berger, and Andrew Sturtz, Penn State was unstoppable. When the final horn sounded, Penn State would walk away with a 10-3 thrashing. But now it was time for their biggest test ever. Penn State faced Denver, the number 1 team in the nation. The Pioneers would show their pedigree, scoring twice in the first 10 minutes to take a decisive lead. Nikita Palace would tack on a shorthanded goal before the first ended, and Dennis Smirnoff would open the scoring in the second period, tying the game. Unfortunately for the Nittany Lions, Denver had a ringer who would end up being NHL talent Troy Terry. Terry would score twice and get an assist to end the second period with Denver up 5-2. Penn State would get some life back with 7.5 minutes to go, but Troy Terry would complete the hat trick and then the Nittany Lions' first tournament run in the quarterfinals. It was an unbelievable run for such a young team, and there was a lot of hope in the next year for Penn State to improve. To put the cherry on top, Penn State would finish their season ranked for the first time, held highly at 8th.
Want to see me run to that mountain and back? You want to see me do it again?
2017 would bring a lot of changes to the new Big Ten, as a new but familiar opponent would join, Notre Dame. Now with 7 teams, the Big Ten tournament would also see a major revamp, with the number 1 seed getting a bye, and all games now moving to the campus of the higher seed. No more seeing Joe Louis Arena empty for amazing moments that would have blown the roof off of Pagula, Penn State started their season looking to keep the momentum going, but they just couldn't find their footing. They would either split or get swept in their first 3 Big Ten games, and fell in non-conference games to teams such as Clarkson, Mercyhurst, and American International. However, a trip to Arizona State would kick off one of the most impressive streaks so far, as Penn State would go 11 games without a loss, with 9 wins and 3 ties, with their opponents mainly being Big Ten teams. The Nittany Lions then decided to follow this up with an 8-game winless streak. Because this was mostly against highly ranked teams such as Notre Dame, Michigan, and Ohio State, they weren't punished in the USHL rankings as heavily. They'd finished the regular season on a good note, with a home series sweep against the number 8 Minnesota, a win that gave them 4th place finish in the Big Ten, but would also secure home ice advantage in the first round, also against Minnesota. The first round of the Big Ten tournament would now be a 3-game series, and Game 1 was filled with scoring. The Golden Gophers and Nittany Lions would trade power play goals in the first before another power play goal from Penn State would give them an early lead in the second. Scott Reedy of Minnesota would tie the game, but Dennis Smirnoff and Andrew Sturtz would score within a minute of each other to give Penn State a 4-2 lead. While future Buffalo Sabres player Casey Middlestat would make it 4-3, freshman Evan Barrett would put the game out of reach with an empty net goal. If you could believe it, Game 2 would be an even higher scoring game, as Penn State would take a 3-0 lead in the first before a head contact major by Brett Murray would give Minnesota a power play goal to start the second period. Penn State would also get their own power play goal, but Minnesota would rip off 3 straight to take the lead. James Robinson of Penn State would find the back of the net to tie it all up heading into the final frame. Minnesota would strike first, but Penn State responded on the power play, and over halfway through the last period, who else but Evan Barrett would put this one home for his 3rd goal in 2 games, to eventually give Penn State the series sweep. The semifinals would be a clash between 2 football blue bloods on the ice, as the Nittany Lions traveled to the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Despite never winning a national championship, Notre Dame has been a varsity sport since 1968, and they showed experience. They won the regular season, and were looking to keep on steaming. Both teams would score twice in the first period, each getting 1 on the power play, and would remain deadlocked that way up until the last minute of regulation, when... Damn, such a great game ending on a bad bounce like that. Notre Dame would go on to win the Big Ten, and while the Nittany Lions fell short here, they did qualify for the NCAA tournament. This was also special, as it was the first time Penn State would be hosting a tournament game, with the Midwest region now taking place at the PPL Center in Allentown, Pennsylvania. They would once again be the 3rd seed, but would also be facing a familiar opponent, the Denver Pioneers. From the moment the puck hit the ice, Penn State would find themselves thoroughly outclassed. Denver would score twice in the first and second period to take a commanding 4-0 lead. Sophomore Liam Folks gave Penn State life, but Denver would strike right back. Just as quickly as their tournament run had begun, it ended in a 5-1 defeat. While you could hardly call an NCAA tournament appearance disappointing, you just have to think if the magic of 2016 had carried over, some things would have been different.
We cannot beat this motherfucking team for shit!
2018 saw many former heroes leave, as defenseman Eric Audio and Andrew Stortz both signed professional contracts, and captain James Robinson graduated. Penn State would start out this year ranked 16th, which makes sense as they were one of the first teams eliminated from the NCAA tournament. However, with some key Big Ten teams losing, and only losing one of their non-conference games, they were quickly catapulted to 5th before their first meeting of the Big Ten with Michigan. This is where we find Penn State, yet again, in their quote-unquote comfortable position, going on random small streaks, winning 3 games here, losing 3 games there. This would culminate in a streak from January to February, where they lost 4 straight, then won 5 of their next 6. A series split to end the season would put Penn State's playoff hopes in a precarious situation. They would enter the Big Ten tournament ranked 17th, and would need either major help out of town, or to win the Big Ten in order to make the NCAA tournament. Penn State would once again be ranked 4th, which meant another 3-game home series, this time against Wisconsin. Game 1 would be rough, as Wisconsin would take the lead and not relinquish it until late in the 3rd when Penn State would tie the game at 3. While the Roar Zone was rocking and Penn State had momentums, Wisconsin would rip the hearts out of all the fans under 2 to go in the 3rd. Penn State would try their damnedest to score with an empty net, even going 6-on-4 for the last 30 seconds, but Wisconsin would take Game 1. And to add insult to injury, sophomore Evan Barrett would be given a 5-in-a-game penalty after a whistle for an on-ice fight. He would also then be suspended for the do-or-die Game 2. Luckily for Penn State, they decided to wake up, and after going down 1-0 early again, they'd rip off 5 straight goals to put the game out of reach, with the final score ended up being 6-2. It's time for Game 3. While it's not as exciting as a Game 7 sounds, it has all the stakes. The Nittany Lions and the Badgers would trade blows, with the score tied at 3 at the end of the second period. The 3rd would be filled with both teams not giving an inch, and we'd head to the most entertaining scenario in sports. Winner goes home, overtime hockey. The refs would let this one play out, and halfway through overtime, who else but Liam Folk? Penn State would be on the road to the semifinals, facing off against hated rival Ohio State. Now, to be frank, this game was an utter ass-kicking from the Nittany Lions. By the time Ohio State scored their first goal, there was 4 minutes left in the game, and they were losing by 4. Penn State would win 5-1 and advance to their second ever Big Ten final, and who else but Notre Dame to be waiting for them. Both teams were once again going blow for blow, a very nice trend in these Big Ten tournaments. Notre Dame would score, Penn State responded. Notre Dame made it 2-1, Penn State tied it 34 seconds later. This is how the game played out until the second period, when Notre Dame's Cam Morrison took a lead off a seeing eye shot. Penn State would fight the whole period, but it wouldn't be enough. Notre Dame would repeat as champions, and Penn State would be eliminated from the NCAA tournament play, finishing 17th in the rankings. Another season where Penn State seems to get close, but not close enough. Man, it's really starting to feel like football all over again.
Hey, I was invisible! Cool!
I don't feel so good.
This was it. While Penn State did lose major pieces to graduation, such as Chase Berger, the incoming talent seemed to more than make up for it. Couple this with the fact that talent regression from most other teams in the Big Ten were taking place, and Penn State was poised to make a deep run. This was also the first season Penn State had consistency, as they did not lose more than 2 games in a row the entire season. Nate Suzy and Evan Barrett were both over a point per game in what could have been perceived as a down year for scoring in the NCAA, and senior goaltender Peyton Jones was a brick wall, placing a 2.6 goals against average and a 919 save percentage, a number only bested by few, such as Matt Murray and Spencer Knight. And in Game 1 of the final regular season series at home versus Minnesota, Penn State would secure a shootout win, clinching the number 1 seed for the first time ever. It really was one of the best seasons of Penn State hockey history, and it ended just like that.
24 hours. They did make that announcement just within the past couple minutes. The NCAA issuing this statement. I'm going to read it to you. It says, today, NCAA President Mark Emmert and the Board of Governors canceled the Division I men and women's 2020 basketball tournaments, as well as the remaining of all winter and spring NCAA championships. This decision is based on the evolving COVID-19 public health threat, our ability to ensure the events do not contribute to the spread of the pandemic, and the impracticality of hosting such events at any time.
I was in 8th grade when COVID started. It was a pretty difficult time for me, not only because my mother was a healthcare worker, meaning I was accustomed to getting first-hand experience of all the hardship other people are facing, but I also lived in rural Maine. When you realize you can't ride your bike to your friend's house and your internet is only 5 megabits per second at best, and you have 7 other people living with you, you definitely feel a little more isolated. I'm not saying I had it bad. Lord knows there are people who suffered a lot more than I did, but I still realized just how difficult this time was, and I can't imagine the seniors at the Roar Zone and what they went through. They were blessed with an amazing season their freshman year and have been chasing that high ever since. And just when it seemed to be our turn again, everything ground to a halt. Sports, especially college sports, would be changed forever, and the fallout is still being experienced today. The 2019-2020 Penn State hockey season will always be a season of what-ifs, and it will remain that way forever.
What do we do now? What do you mean? Now we can finally play the game. Oh yeah.
The 2020-2021 season can only be called hectic. Penn State would lose an ungodly amount of talent due to pandemic and graduation. It also would have been worse if the NCAA didn't implement a rule allowing all players to retain another year of eligibility. Notable departures included Evan Barrett, Brandon Biro, Cole Holtz, Dennis Smirnov, and goaltender Peyton Jones. Talent would be acquired, however, as fan favorites such as Xander Lampa and Jimmy Dowd Jr. would begin their Penn State journey, along with goaltender Liam Soulier, who would be touched on later. The season would be shortened, which did not help Penn State, as they would lose their first 5 games, all to ranked Big Ten opponents. Things would start to turn around after a series sweep of number 20 ranked Arizona State, and would only lose 4 out of the next 11 games. Then, disaster struck. A major COVID outbreak would sideline the team for over a month, missing the entire game slate of February. They returned to play was the last week of the season, versus Notre Dame away. They would be absolutely destroyed, with a goal differential of -9 over 2 games. Most were expecting the worst by the time the Big Ten tournament rolled around, as the Lions would travel to Notre Dame once again. But it seemed like the other ass-kicking the Nittany Lions got woke them up, as Connor McMahon and Chase McLean would combine for 4 goals, giving Penn State the 6-3 win. The Nittany Lions would move on to the number 1 team in the Big Ten, Wisconsin, where they faced yet another barn burner of a game. Needing a win to keep their slim NCAA tournament hopes alive, Penn State would lead 3-2 late in the third. Unfortunately, Wisconsin had what seemed to be Penn State's kryptonite, high-end NHL talent. And who was it this time? Oh, just the lead scorer in the NCAA and first-round draft pick, Cole Caulfield. A power play goal with 5 minutes left would tie the game, and 7 minutes into overtime. Yep, you guessed it, Caulfield would end it. A lackluster season, while disappointing, really couldn't put on anyone in particular. It was just a victim of circumstance.
We lose every week. You're nothing special. We lose every week.
2021-2022 season was lackluster at best. It was definitely a rebuilding year. However, recruiting did look pretty good. Modern Penn State staples such as eventual captains Simon Mack, Dylan Lugris, Ben Schoen, Carson Dick, and Danny Genev all got their start here. Unfortunately for the fans, this change takes time, and boy, Penn State needed it. They started off well enough, winning 6 of their first 7 games, including a 6-4 win over number 6 North Dakota at Bridgestone Arena in Nashville, Tennessee, but everything fell off from there. Penn State would lose 4 conference games in a row and eventually finish their first half of the season near the bottom of the Big Ten. The season would start to take a turn when Guy Gadowski would start favoring goaltender Liam Soulier over Oscar Audio. But no matter how much you shine a turd, it's still a pile of shit. Penn State would only be ranked for 2 weeks, topping out at 16th, and would limp their way into the Big Ten tournament, only picking up a win in one of their last 8 games. Liam would be given the nod for the whole tournament, and Game 1 was rough. Going down 3-0 in the second, the Nittany Lions would push back and make it a 1-goal game, but the Buckeye pressure was just too much. Penn State would lose 4-3, with all 3 of their goals coming in the third period. Something drastic would have to come in Game 2 for Penn State to pull out a win, which would come by solid goaltending of Liam Soulier and the new kids in the block getting involved. Dylan Lugris would score the second of his career to open it, and Ben Schoen would assist on each of the next goals, his second one coming with under 3 to go in the third period to have the final score be 3-2. Penn State was back, and they weren't just looking to take Game 3, they were looking for blood. Another tight game had Penn State and Ohio State tied at 1 entering the third period, and would remain that way all the way until just 7 minutes to go.
McEachran works it aside for DeNaples, cross ice, shooting, scoring, Penn State, Lugris, his second of the weekend, just the third of his career.
I'd say Dylan Lugris silenced the Ohio crowd, but as you can tell, it's already pretty quiet in there. Penn State was moving on, traveling to the Twin Cities to play the number 2 team in the nation, Minnesota. The Golden Gophers would jump out immediately, taking a 2-goal lead just 30 seconds into the second period. Penn State wasn't going down without a fight, however, as Tyler Paquette would light the lamp just 5 minutes remaining in the second, and after a quick penalty, who else but Mr. Big Ten tournament Dylan Lugris tied the game. Minnesota was still hard on attack, but Penn State was holding on.
What the fuck is that?
Wow. The worst time to have a total defensive and goaltending breakdown had just occurred. Penn State had been punched in the mouth, and they were down for the count. Even with the goaltender pulled for over 2 minutes, Penn State would lose 3-2. Their worst season since 2013 had finally ended, and the hope was that the rebuild was finally over.
We're back!
This season was definitely the start of Penn State's modern prime. Minimal talent was lost, and more impactful names such as Jared Crespo and Carter Shade had joined. Liam Soulier also took over as the number 1 goalie, but Penn State still had to figure out how they wanted to play in the Big Ten. They were lucky through easier games at the beginning, and their first win over a number 1 ranked opponent in team history, a 3-0 home win over Michigan, meant they were still looked upon favorably by the pairwise. This still kept up throughout their scheduled late season choke, as they would only drop to 10th after losing 9 of their last 12. The Big Ten tournament would take them once again to Columbus, Ohio, where the first game was a 5-1 thrashing by the Buckeyes. Penn State would stave off elimination in Game 2 with a 4-on-4 overtime goal from Kevin Wall. However, Game 3 would be too much for the exhausted Nittany Lion team, as they would fall 3-1 to the Buckeyes. Because of their standings, Penn State would still clinch a berth in the NCAA tournament, and luckily enough, Penn State would be once again hosting at Allentown. This was definitely one of the most lopsided regionals Penn State had ever been a part of, as number 1 Michigan would absolutely kill number 4 seed Colgate 11-1, and the Nittany Lions would demolish number 3 seed Michigan Tech 4-0 in their first game. The ensuing regional finals had huge expectations, and it didn't disappoint. Penn State would open the scoring with just a minute left in the second period on a power play goal from Carter McEachran. But Michigan's Adam Fantilli would score a power play goal of his own with 8 minutes to go in the third to tie the game and send us to beautiful overtime. This is where we find something that is becoming a bit of a problem. Liam Soulier. He has been playing well, but he has a tendency to let in soft goals from time to time. And unfortunately, this was one of those times.
Seamus Casey will feed it ahead for Samoskevich. Goes right to the middle. Great shot. He scores. It's over.
As Mackie Samoskevich put one past the blocker just 52 seconds into overtime. While the regular season could be considered lackluster, the postseason play would definitely catapult this into becoming one of Penn State's most successful seasons. The next couple of years will be crucial for Penn State hockey.
Oh no! We suck again!
Remember how I said this was the start of Penn State's modern prime? Yeah, well, I kind of forgot that this year happened. There were a couple of big problems holding Penn State back, mainly the departure of their top 4 scorers from the year before. Kevin Wall, Turlin Den, Connor McEachern, and Connor McMeerman. The other was a problem that's been brewing for the past couple years. Liam Souliere. Liam went from being a steady rock in net who'd let up a couple soft goals to absolutely shitting the bed at every single part of the season, turning what could have been a deep Big Ten tournament run and possible NCAA playoff berth into an unstoppable train wreck. There'd be some great recruits, from Matt DeMarsico, Dane Dowiak, Aiden Fink, Reese Lawback, and Casey Amon, but when you throw a bunch of freshmen into the flames, you're gonna burn them. After an easy non-conference schedule, Penn State would be torched when Big Ten play started, tying their first 3 games, then losing 3 of their next 4. The first half of the season would end when they got swept by Wisconsin. The second half would be no better, as they'd only amassed 5 wins for the rest of the season, 4 of which came against the Buckeyes, the worst team in the Big Ten. What stuck out to me from the beginning of November until the end of February, there were only 3 games where Penn State did not allow 3 goals. It also didn't help that Penn State's defense was one of the worst in the entire NCAA. Penn State would drag its way into the Big Ten tournament, facing off against Minnesota. Game 1 would be exactly what people thought. A blowout in which Liam Souliere let up 4 goals on 22 shots. Game 2 would start with more of the same, as Jackson Nelson would net 2 in the first to take an early lead for the Golden Gophers. Some mid-game heroics by Jimmy Dowd Jr. and Matt DeMarsico would tie it up, and it looked like Penn State was going to force overtime until...
Bo makes the turn, loses it, Lamb walks in, shoots, scores!
Brother, this guy stinks!
Penn State's worst season since 2013 would end off with terrible defensive play and a head-scratching play attempt from Liam Souliere. Par for the course.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
The 2024-25 season saw the departure of some fan-favorite games, like Chase McLean and Xander Lampa. Oh, and one goalie named Liam Souliere.
Get the fuck out of here!
I wonder what happened to him. Penn State would get multiple new recruits, including forwards Charlie Serrato and J.J. Webush, and goaltender Arseny Sergeyev. Guy Godowski was hoping that the veteran goaltender from Connecticut would help turn their luck from last season. To start, it didn't seem like it. This was my freshman year, and the first season I watched in person at Penn State. And November to January was a rough time. The Nittany Lions would lose their first 8 conference games, including their home series to bitter rival Michigan. This was mainly due to Sergeyev going down with a lower body injury in a 6-3 home loss to the Wisconsin Badgers. Backup goaltender Noah Grannon was unable to hold the net, so Penn State would call up John Seifarth from the Penn State club team. While he did give up a couple games to number 17th Ohio State away, which, that's kind of a given, he held his ground against Colgate and Army, allowing Sergeyev to come back at the start of the new year healthy. This is where Penn State's season would turn around in a shocking display of resilience. The Nittany Lions would only lose 2 games the entirety of January and February. Some highlights included sweeping number 19 Wisconsin at the Kohl Center, traveling to number 1 Michigan State and taking a shootout win and a regulation win, and what might be considered the best series Penn State has ever played, against number 9 ranked Ohio State at home. The first game would be another barn burner, with Ohio State taking a 6-5 lead late before Danny Geniev would dive for a puck, tying the game with just 12 seconds left. Little side note, I was right in front of the net when this happened, and it was a frenzy. Dylan Lugers would score the only goal in the shootout to take Game 1. Game 2 would be more the same, as a record-breaking crowd of 6,604 would cram into Pagula to see Reese Lawback put the overtime winner away to win it 3-2. Penn State was nearly unstoppable, which culminated in the last series of the regular season. Number 2 ranked Minnesota at number 15 ranked Penn State. Pagula Ice Arena, whiteout night, and who else starting for the Golden Gophers but disgraced former goaltender Liam Souliere, who transferred to an in-conference rival for his graduate year. Tensions were already high, as the booing started when the players took the ice. Minnesota would take an early lead, but in the second period, well, I'll just show you.
Everything to the outside.
Re-entry, they score! DeMarsico entering the zone.
What happens after a goal?
Oliver Moore is going to keep an eye out for that next shift as this crowd is more than back into it. On the zone entry here. Nittany Lions come roaring back in, dragging and shooting there is Serrano. Burying a back. They score again.
Minnesota and Penn State would continue to trade the lead before heading to overtime, tied at 3.
Back out there as well. Here comes Mack with speed. Scores!
And who else but Captain Simon Mack would put the game away, blowing the roof off of Pegula. Unfortunately, due to Michigan holding tiebreakers, Penn State was unable to clinch the 4th seed with a win in Game 2, and Minnesota would show off their high-powered offense, taking Penn State down 5-3 to split the series. The Nittany Lions would head to Michigan for Game 1 of the Big Ten quarterfinals, and it did not disappoint. Goals were flying left and right, with Penn State taking a 3-1 lead in the first before Michigan would make it 3-2 at the end of the second. The Wolverines would tie the game in the third, but J.J. Webush would rattle off 2 quick goals to take the 5-3 lead. Michigan was prepared, and would eventually tie the game with just under 5 minutes to go. We're heading back to overtime, baby, where Michigan would take a bad tripping penalty. If there's any time for a hero, it'd be now.
Side point. Cross ice to Serrano. Out to Webush. Through the legs. Penn State takes game 1.
J.J. Webush. That'll be all. The last time Penn State won a playoff game in Yost Ice Arena was in 2014. Game 2 would see Penn State keep their foot on the gas, going up 3-1 in the second, then 4-2 by the time the third started. Charlie Serrano would get a penalty shot goal late in the third to ice the game, then immediately get ejected for celebrating. Penn State would move on to number 10 Ohio State. They were now ranked 11th, and while a win would guarantee their NCAA tournament bid, they had basically clinched by now. A back-and-forth game took place at Nationwide Arena, with Penn State and Ohio State not giving an inch. Controversy would arise when the Buckeyes would take the lead off a shot that many people, myself included, believe was hit with a high stick. Matt DeMarsico would tie the game 3 minutes later, and we'd go to overtime. Ohio State showed their pedigree and would smother the Penn State offense, allowing just 1 shot on goal in overtime. And unfortunately, with 5.5 minutes to go in the first overtime, Gunnar Wolf-Fontaine would get his second of the game and eliminate Penn State from the Big Ten tournament. Luckily, Penn State only dropped to 12th heading into the NCAA tournament and secured a bid while, once again, would be hosting at PPL Center in Allentown. They drew the Hockey East champion, Maine, and it looked to be their toughest test yet. To be honest, that's not how the game really went. The Black Bears would score first, but J.J. Webush would answer just 1 minute later. It was then all Penn State the rest of the way, with Matt DeMarsico and Dane Dowiak both getting 2 goals to win 5-1. They'd move on to face UConn, with Penn State's first ever trip to the Frozen Four on the line. With Sergeyev facing his old team, it'd be much closer than the main game. UConn would take the lead in the first period, but Dane Dowiak would respond. UConn would once again take the lead in the second, but J.J. Webush would respond. Penn State then sat back for a bit while the Huskies turned the pressure to 11. Arseni held strong and managed to force overtime, where it was more the same. The Nittany Lions were getting bombarded, and there was even an attempted Michigan by a UConn player, which was quickly shut down. It started to seem like Penn State was running out of gas, but they got a quick burst up the ice.
Oh, Serrano moves in, swung it back, DeMarsico fires, scores! It's over! Penn State to the Frozen Four for the first time ever!
A beautiful pass from Charlie Serrano allowed Matt DeMarsico to send PPL into bedlam, and gave Penn State their first Frozen Four appearance in their history. It kinda sucked that I was a broke freshman at the time, as if this happened the next year, I totally would have made the trip to St. Louis. But regardless, I watched at the official watch party in Pegula Ice Arena as the Nittany Lions took on the Boston University Terriers. The game was hard fought, as both teams couldn't capitalize on anything in the first period. BU would break the ice in the first with a shot from Jack Hughes, no relation. The Terriers would add one again, making it 2-0 BU. Penn State needed a spark to keep their season alive, and freshman Nick Chindagraves would answer, scoring 2 minutes into the third to get Penn State life. They unleashed a barrage of shots, 18 in the entire third, trying to get one past Mikhail Yegorov, but he stood strong, and an empty net goal with a minute remaining would seal the game. While a disappointing end, it really marked the resilience of Penn State to come from such a shitty place to this far. And to cap it off, Penn State would be ranked the highest they've ever been at the end of the season, finishing 5th. This was the most successful year in Penn State hockey history, and now expectations were sky high. The 2025-26 season was the most anticipated yet, and things got cranked up to 11 during the summer of 25. New rule changes in the NCAA allowed Canadian major junior players to play varsity ice hockey, and there was one kid at the center of a bidding war. Gavin McKenna, the prospective #1 prospect in the 2026 NHL entry draft, had a choice: defending Big Ten champs Michigan State or the recent Frozen Four runner-ups Penn State. Gavin chose wisely, becoming one of the biggest prospects to join Penn State athletics since Saquon Barkley in 2015. Penn State did lose some talent, for defenseman Jimmy Dow Jr. and Simon Mack, forwards Danny Janirov and Dylan Lugris, and star goaltender Arseny Sergeyev. Recruiting morpher made up for this, as aside from Gavin McKenna, Penn State brought in forwards Luke Misa and Shea Van Olm, 2 goaltenders Josh Fleming and Kevin Riddler, and defenseman Matt Godowski and Jackson Smith, the latter being the first-round draft pick in Penn State hockey history, being picked 14th overall by the Columbus Blue Jackets 2025. The season would start strong, as Penn State would lose only 1 game in October, although it was its home opener to Clarkson. November is when it got a bit more shaky, as Penn State would get swept at Michigan State and get creamed by Michigan in Game 1 of their home series. Game 2 was a lot better, as Luke Misa, Reese Laubeck, and Nick Fash would all get one before Nick Chindagraves would end the game with an empty netter to get the win 4-2. The start of the new year would be very poorly, as I would watch at a Denver Pioneers game as Penn State would lose to RIT, a team they heavily outmatched and outshot 44-21. However, the rest of January would be fairly nice, as Penn State would pick up 6 straight conference wins against Minnesota, Notre Dame, and number 5 Wisconsin away. Then came the most anticipated series, Michigan State at home. Not only was this special, as Michigan State was one of the top teams in the NCAA, but this also was special due to Penn State electing to host an outdoor game at Beaver Stadium. I won't go into too much detail of this series, as I covered it heavily in my vlog, which you should check out right now, but Penn State would get hoed in Game 1 and then lose Game 2 in overtime. This would be the start of Penn State's seasonal decline, as even though they had high-end talent out the ass, they couldn't figure out their power play, and Kevin Riddler was very hit or miss in net. A move controversial to those in the Roar Zone, Josh Fleming would split the net with Kevin Riddler, and it seemed that in most games, neither one of them could find their footing in time. Penn State would only win 2 of their last 10 games, and finish 3rd in the Big Ten. This was still pretty good, all things considered, but everyone thought this season was it. They'd host Minnesota in the Big Ten tournament, their first home playoff game since 2019, in which strong play by all the superstars, and surprisingly, Matt Godowski's first goal of the year, Penn State would easily dispatch Minnesota 6-2. They then moved on to Michigan, hoping to keep their streak of playoff games at Yost alive. Gavin McKenna would tie the game at 1 in the first before Michigan would get 2 more in the third. This is where we find probably the biggest problem of Penn State hockey this year, the power play. I don't know what was going on with Andrew Sturtz, who had been hired as an assistant coach in 2023, but the power play was abysmal this year. And this was seen as Penn State had 5 straight power plays with no goals and would go 0 for 6 on the day. Penn State would lose 5-2 in one of the most disappointing ventures of the year. Luckily, Penn State had clinched the NCAA tournament about a month ago and were shipped off to Albany, New York. They squandered an easy first seed and ended up taking the 3 seed, facing off against Minnesota Duluth. A win tonight would see them take on Michigan again in the regional finals, so the stakes were high. Shea Van Olm got the party started in the first period, throwing a puck on net from below the goal line that somehow squeaked its way through. Max Plan and Minnesota Duluth would tie the game, and it would stay that way until about 5 minutes left in the third period, when Hunter Anderson found the back of the net, crushing the Penn State bench and the traveling Roar Zone, including me. The Nittany Lions would pull their goaltender, but were unable to make anything happen, as an empty net goal would seal the fate of the 2025-26 season. As a fan at the game, it was hard to watch, especially as Minnesota Duluth had the same number of shots in the third period as Penn State did in both the second and third. It just looked like the team was out of gas, and the high-end talent from Gavin McKenna was unable to pull through at the end. Well, no season that ends in an NCAA tournament bid can be considered bad, but the amount of pressure and expectations this team had just made it feel like wasted potential. To rub salt in the wound, Penn State would have to watch another Big Ten team make the NCAA finals in Wisconsin. Luckily, they'd lose to Denver, but there are a lot of questions going into the offseason that need to be answered.
My players! Where did they go? Where did they go?
We finally made it to the current day, and Penn State's hockey future is pretty muddied. It's all been confirmed that Gavin McKenna will not be returning, and almost all of Penn State's top 6 will be leaving, including Aiden Fink, Matt DeMarsico, and Charlie Serrato. JJ Webush decided to be a fucking traitor and go to Wisconsin, and Jared Crespo and Cade Christensen also left. Kevin Riddler is gone as well, which may be the blessing in disguise, as Josh Fleming will now have the starter's net to himself. That doesn't mean there's no more talent, as the recruits are looking great. Kale Dock, Ethan Weber, and Andrew Kuzma all look to be great additions for the Nittany Lions, and transfers Caden Harrington and Justin Poirier look to give the offense an extra boost. Then there's Ryder Fedorov, one of the highest goaltender prospects Penn State has ever signed. It's going to be a transitional season, but I believe that's true for most teams. Michigan State, the back-to-back winners of the Big Ten, lost their captain Porter Martone and their best player Trey Augustine.
Take him to Detroit.
Michigan's also had to trim some fat, as well as Wisconsin. I feel like Penn State this year won't have these big expectations, and therefore will be able to roll with the punches. Well, I don't expect them to win the national championship, but I do think they're going to go far. God, I hope they make the Frozen Four, because the national championship is in DC this year. So could you imagine the vlog I'd be able to get? At any rate, thank you for watching. This is a video I've wanted to make for a while, and I think I've finally started to get down the type of content I want to make. I'm going to be streaming a lot more during the coming months, especially when I go back to Penn State, as I secured a single room to myself. I'm also going to be transitioning State of the State to be a weekly stream instead of a weekly recap video. Not only do I think there's a lot of people breaking down college games in ways similar that I am, but I also feel like this will be a lot easier to produce the content, and I can go over more things than I would normally. I might post some gaming videos here and there just to do something over the summer, and I'll keep making shorter shitpost videos, like Steam State when it's warranted. I cannot wait for this next Penn State hockey season, but I do enjoy not being stressed about it every single day of the week. Until October, thank you guys for watching, comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.